Hey, how you doing? Ernie Costa back again for another episode of Real World IT. Today, I have the privilege of talking to the one and only Matt Roper of Cherokee County School District. Matt is a supervisor of network and security services over at Cherokee County. Their IT department manages, I just found this out. I was blown away. A massive amount of students and employees. Matt, what is it? Something like 42,000 total end users at the end of the day, something like that.
Yeah, 42,000 students and about 6,000 staff now.
That's unbelievable. Wow. I
Yes.
thought the staff was included in that count. I'm still blown away. Like we're doing this first cut and I'm still blown away with that number. That
Yep.
is an insane amount of people that you guys deal with there. So we're super privileged to have Matt on today. The K-12 thing is something that doesn't fall into my purview often. I think a lot of sysadmins that deal with this type of stuff are either in the service side of the shop, like their MSPs or their CSPs, or there's someone like me that works for like an ISV that is just dealing with an enterprise. You are dealing with a large amount of end users that have different roles and responsibilities. I mean, kids and staff, and then you also have a large number of remote offices, right? So like
Yeah, we
that
have like
that
almost 50, I think, different locations. So there's a good bit of like campuses we have to manage, and we have to make sure, obviously, the core business is educating students. So that's what we have to focus on, is making sure access to those campuses is close to 100% as possible. So it's a challenge, but I think we do a
yeah.
pretty good job.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. So the chat today, we're gonna talk a little bit about obviously Azure Stack HCI, where that fits into your day-to-day operations, how it benefits you, some of the new things that have come out in 23 H2 kind of in the last couple months. So we're filming this actually at the end of May. It's May 31st today, and late last night, right before I went to bed, I saw a new update came out, the 2405 update, which I think will be the start of a new release train as well. So there's we could chat about that a little bit. We won't go into the nitty-gritty details, but there is some interesting things in there. So we're gonna get started. As you know, Azure Stack HCI is the what we used to call a different operating system from Microsoft, but I think with 23H2 we can kind of change that vernacular, that terminology, and not call it a new operating system anymore. I've been explaining it to people as a kind of like a full solution that's provided by Microsoft, not just the OS at the location, but you have your hardware, but you also have your lifecycle management portion of it, and then your cloud connectivity for kind of centralized management. If that's the way I explain it, and I want to ask you as a consumer of this, when you're pitching this to your executive staff or whatever you want to call it, is that what you explain, or is that how you interpret it?
We try to like say it in ways that they can interpret it. So for them, they focus on, like, I guess more so the technology that's built into Azure Stack HCI. And one of the big hot topics for us right now anyway is VDI. So if I mention VDI, they like immediately associate that with, oh, okay, that's what you run on Azure Stack. And that's the virtualization platform that we invested in several years ago now. So they kind of understand when you say those things that they see on a daily basis, they're like, oh, okay, I got it. So instead of like him having to associate it with Azure Stack HCI, they're just like, oh, VDI, okay, I got you.
It's the thing that runs the VDI, and that kind of checks the box for
Exactly.
them. That's
Exactly.
that's really cool.
It just
Yeah,
works in
we
the background. They don't have to worry about it. So they're like, oh, okay, I'm happy with that.
got it. So you as a consumer of this, though, as the administrator, the one that's actually managing it, what does that mean to you from a like full life cycle thing? Like you mentioned earlier, you have almost 50 locations that you're deploying these things at, the solution, the hardware, and the like. What if you had a 51st location spin up? What does that look like for you in terms of configuring and installing and deploying?
Yeah, I mean, the good thing for us, I would say, Ernie, is the fact that, we are able to centralize our deployment a good bit. So we do invest on the clusters that we've invested in. They're a little bit larger to support the entire workloads that we would need to put on them district-wide for staff and students. So 2 data centers ultimately is what we've built over the past 10 years or so. In fact, when I first started here 10 years ago, we actually built that second data center in the back of one of our middle schools. So that's where part of our Azure Stack deployments in that data center, and then part of it's in our primary data center. So ultimately, to add a 51st site, we have the we're fortunate enough to have a WAN provider. So all we'd have to ultimately do, get our WAN provider out to the new site, which is actually something we're doing right now with one of our elementary school rebuilds, Freehome. They'll ultimately run fiber that's capable of going up to like 100 gig plus, however much bandwidth we need to send onto the site. And then ultimately, the students and staff would connect over our private WAN, which ultimately links back up to both of our data centers. So it gives them that, I think I mentioned to you earlier, close to 100% uptime on those critical services for them, because we do have some workloads that it's not feasible to run them like, you know how graphically intensive certain workloads can be,
Sure.
especially
Yeah.
when you do like CAD work and stuff like that. So you can't do that on a Chromebook. So obviously they need a way to have a low cost device, but still get the performance they need in order to do their assignments. And, ultimately we like to see what they create. So we need to give them the infrastructure, and, we basically give them the roadways, they do the magic.
So that's a good point. We touched on it for a few seconds earlier, but it's your primary usage for Azure Stack HCI is AVD workloads. Or I should say VDI workloads that are graphic intensive. Is that a good analogy or a good
Yes.
summarization? So
Yeah.
you're talking thousands of VMs. Like how many VMs are you typically running for these students? Are they personal? Are they multi-session? Tell us a little bit about what that AVD workspace looks like.
Okay, yeah. So AVD is something that's very new to us. The last year we've done like a pilot on it. So we ultimately just had a couple of VMs that were running. I think we had 3 or 4 different CTAE classes. So CTAE just covers subjects that are related to like drafting, design, home economics, stuff like that. So things that are just not normal, math, science stuff. It's kind of beyond that, the specialty things. So ultimately, though, our plan this year is we did invest in the like a 16 nodes. So we'll have like 2 separate 8-node clusters. And, we'd like to run hundreds of VMs on there that can support these graphic workloads, but also too, we want to be able to support the students that don't necessarily need as much compute and GPU power, but they could actually run like full version of Microsoft Office, for example, on their Chromebook, because you can't really technically do that. It's more of a web app. So if you need those specialized features that you can only get through the full desktop client, we want to deliver that experience to the Chromebook. So it mimics what they had on Windows, because we were a very heavy Windows shop, but kind of transitioned to Chrome OS just because of the fact that, there's many benefits to it, but ultimately it's much easier to manage at scale and it's much more affordable.
Yeah, I've been a big proponent of using very cheap end user devices and then delivering those more expensive solutions through a VDI type of
Exactly.
environment. Yeah, I mean, my wife used to work in a school district as well, and staff was given Chromebooks, and she'd bring it home, and I'm like, this thing's a slow pile of garbage, and then you kind of realize it's, oh well, you're not really doing much physically local to the device. If you're doing heavy graphic workloads, it's happening somewhere in a data center. So
Exactly. Yeah, we wanted to
no,
focus on experiences. That's kind of what we were focused on. It's like, instead of like worrying about what devices it's going to be, because ultimately we want to deliver the same experience, whether they're on campus, off campus, grandparents' house, coffee shop, doesn't matter where, whatever device you use, it's ultimately going to, draw from the power of AVD to produce the content that they're trying to create.
So I want to take just a minute more on AVD and talk about the life cycle, because my experience with AVD, if you've watched these videos in the past or seen me blog, has been very much like a private preview, public preview type of usage, where I'm manually making these VMs. I'm manually registering them to a host pool up in Azure. And I've built some orchestration myself around that in System Center and VMM. But at this point, I am still not leveraging the Arc resource bridge and automation that you get with the newest version of Azure Stack HCI. So with that being said, what does your life cycle look like for these VMs? Is it an on-demand thing? Are you told ahead of time how many you need? And then kind of like, what does that click operation look like at the end of the day?
Yeah, I think what we decided, Ernie, was we did some of our own like internal metrics, I guess, when we had our POC that we ran last year with AVD. So we kind of just said, okay, we know that this We had, we had just a few VMs that we created, but we were able to determine like, okay, if we create a VM that has these specific specs, I think one of our biggest VMs was like, 24 CPUs and 512 gigs of RAM. So it was just like a beefy VM that could run GPU workloads. We were like, this can scale up to at least 60 students, at least. So we kind of used some of those numbers for that piece. And then two, we had to determine, all right, well, if you just have like a standard virtual machine that I guess we're just running lightweight apps on, how many could that support? And I think we had a couple of hundred that those could support. So ultimately we said, okay, great. We have those numbers now. And we know we have, let's just say 2,000 students in our CTA programs across the district. So we need to scale that up properly in order to support their GPU workloads. And then we have another additional at least 20,000, middle and high school students that are definitely going to be using this. And you're going to have some elementary schools, but in general, middle and high schools is what is going to have the biggest use out of the VDI from our experience. So roughly you'd have to scale this up to 20,000 users with a mix of, GPU intensive or standard, a CPU is good enough. It's just an office app, So
yeah, absolutely.
Based on that information, we can take, you can go either through the Azure portal and create it through the wizard, right? There's, how that looks today. They've done a lot of good work to improve that experience. You can do that, or you can use the ARM templates and ultimately just say, hey, I want you to create 10 VMs or 20 VMs or 30 VMs. You basically just scale the number up or down, however you want to through the ARM template. And then you just deploy it that way, ultimately, is what our plan was. And it is very, like you said, kind of on demand for us anyway, because we're going to kind of scale it as high as we can at first. And then if we need to scale back, we will. But based on what numbers we had, we're going to start with, we need X amount of VMs, let's just say 200 VMs for GPU workloads, and then, maybe 400 for the lightweight. Just throwing out some random numbers, not necessarily stuff we're actually going to be doing, but I think you get the point of what our intention is. We got the metrics, we feel confident we have the right sizing that we've done internally, and we'll just ultimately deploy through those mechanisms.
No, that's great. And that's the key point. Like the fact that if you're more of a click op type of person, you can go through the portal. If you're a little more comfortable with ARM or Bicep, you can do it through automation. And if you feel cute and you want to do Azure DevOps pipelines, you can get all crazy with this type of stuff.
Exactly.
The world's your oyster. You said one thing about, you kind of start big and then you scale back. Are you leveraging any of the auto scale capabilities, or I should say even like the shut down at a scheduled time and start up at a scheduled time thing? Are you leveraging any of that?
Yeah, we actually did set schedules for that. So I think we, if I remember correctly, it's been a few weeks since we set it up, but we kind of determined, all right, most of the usage happened from our POC last year between like 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. because you'd have students that would stay after and work on projects and whatnot before they headed home. So we kind of use that as our baseline. Like during these hours, 100% of the resources need to be online. But then after those hours, so let's just say from 6 p.m. to 7:59 the next morning, we only need maybe about 20% of our deployment powered on, ready to go. So we did find that really bizarre off hours, students were actually logging in. I saw students at 1 a.m., 3 a.m. just doing stuff in the Autodesk suite, trying to get projects done. So it's almost like we just wanted to say, yes, we definitely have a need for stuff 24/7, but we don't need the entire fleet to be online 24/7. You get a subset of those, after hours, and you would cover all those, all the different times the students tend to log in and work on their projects.
Yeah. So for anyone that's not super comfortable with VDI management, especially with a pay-as-you-go type of model, right, where you're paying per vCPU per hour. If you're running these VMs 24/7, all of the VMs 24/7, you're paying a boatload of money, whether that's in the cloud or on-prem, whether that's AVD, whether that's VMware Horizon or Citrix AS, whatever it may be. It's typically some kind of charge that follows that model. So the auto schedule shutdown capabilities of AVD on HCI, like it will save you a tremendous amount of money. And in Matt's case, it sounds like it's more than 12 hours for 90+% of the fleet that you could turn off, and at least still give that, those I was one of them, those students that are working till 1 a.m, last minute to get a project done. You still are able to meet that very small demand during those weird off hours without, crippling, like, yeah, no one can access it. So a lot of flexibility. Sounds cool. Sounds like you spend a lot of time building out and considering these things. So it's great to hear. The one last question I wanted to bang you on with AVD is, you obviously have a lot of students, you obviously have a lot of host pools in these, or I should say session hosts in these host pools, and they're all multi-session. How are you dealing with user profiles? Are you using FS logics? Are you not? Do you not care about migration of users' data? Like, what does that look like?
We do have a external file share that we're using. So we have, I know we talked a lot about AVD so far, but we do have all of our infrastructure virtual machines running on Azure Stack HCI as well. So our file servers, our application servers for our critical business apps, like our student information system, our HRMS, all that runs on Azure Stack. It's just a different cluster. So we do have some extra capacity on those other clusters to support the profiles getting, the FSLogix profiles getting written to like a file share that we've always had. And what we tend to do is every time, I guess we have awareness of when students go in and out of programs. So when that happens, we can ultimately go and clean up the underlying FSLogix profiles. Let's just say a student leaves the district. We have awareness of when they leave the district, so we can go, either automatically clean it up if we'd like to, or manually go in there and just remove those profiles, so you don't just have those balloon out of control. And it does, the good thing I would say with this is you have a consistent place to save something, and it just doesn't go away every single reboot or log out of the environment. So I know that they really do appreciate that, because sometimes they just forget to save their project. Good thing is it does get saved within that FSLogix profile, and they don't miss a beat.
No, that's 100%. We have some multi-session pools, and I'm only running multi-session for maybe 100 concurrent users at a time, nothing at your scale. But yeah, we're talking about people that need files that got to travel with them day to day. So 100%, very important thing to be aware that FSLogix is supported for AVD on HCI as well as in the cloud, and obviously your traditional RDSH, and even the other environments, Citrix and VMware. So just a good point to be aware of. Man, this is the AVD stuff. I could talk about it all day. I know it had a rough spell. I mean, if you go back a couple of my videos ago, which at this point maybe over a year, I even did a video on kind of like the whole management experience wasn't great. But it sounds like it's come such a long way that you guys are kind of investing your next big leap into it 100%, which is really, really awesome to hear.
Yeah, I think that the shift to the cloud, as painful as it is, Ernie. I know that like when you make a major change on how you deploy something, because we've always been used to just use PowerShell to spin this stuff up,
Sure.
right? But the fact that they kind of shifted that and said, hey, we're going to go a cloud first approach and everything's going to be orchestrated from the cloud down, I feel like ultimately that's going to help like adoption for people who are not as comfortable with scripting and PowerShell, because it's a little bit more like GUI driven. So you don't have to be an expert in PowerShell to actually deploy a new cluster, to set up, AVD. All that's for the most part a click of a button here or there. You do have to configure some settings, but I do like the fact that they've really tried to simplify the deployment process, make it consistent, make it a repeatable process that Microsoft support can actually consistently support. It's good. They're going to run into it's very predictable. You don't have a customer. This customer is using PowerShell. This customer is using the Azure portal. It's all one way, which I think is a great decision. I know there's some growing pains with that, but I think overall they made a really good decision with that.
Absolutely. I know the Microsoft support team, especially specifically the HCI support team, kind of focused in on early builds, so 21 and 22 H2, and focused in on problems that they were seeing frequently come in. And those pain points typically were user environment, right? Like it was like, hey, I'm this special, unique snowflake, and I do my networking this way and I deploy it that way. And I'm one of those people, right? Like I'm guilty of that. We've all been guilty of that over the years. We have our own scripts, and, we think we're cute playing around with registry keys and doing things. And the reality is, if you don't know what you're doing, or you do something that may have been broken through some regressive change upstream, now support's wasting hours to fix this. And that unified deployment model and that unified lifecycle management tool that now kind of deals with it for you, it's going to be painful at first, but it's going to dramatically cut down on problems long term. So it's kind of a long-term investment. Deal with the kick into the shin, and you'll get over it.
Exactly.
So that's a really good segue to my last little batch of questioning. The Azure Stack HCI experience. I think I mentioned really early on in this conversation that we're at the end of May right now. It's May 31st. We're filming this. Literally last night they dropped a new release for the whole 23 H2 platform. So it's release 2405, which will be also the start of a new release train as well. So you'll get a new ISO, and then LCM kind of handles the updates from there. Tell me about updates in your fleet, like your data center, your fleet of HCI servers, and dealing with that through the tooling that Microsoft has now provided with Azure Stack HCI. So a new update came out last night. You're probably not going to click the button on a Friday, right? Like you're not going to do it right yeah, day one on a Friday. I want to go home and have a little fun this weekend. But tell me, generally speaking, like what that would look like for you and your environment.
I do like the improvements they've made to Azure Update Manager. That's kind of as far as I can tell from Microsoft's perspective, that's kind of their preferred path. They'd like for you to do it this way if at all possible. Whereas in the past, we would do it a very manual, like, care and feeding of the update process across all of our clusters. So it is kind of nice that they've made some investments to improve that. I know that it does rely on the back end on, gosh, I'm so sorry, Ernie. I just lost my train of thought. It's cluster where what I was trying to say.
CAU. Yeah,
that's fine. Yes. I know that's got its own set of challenges, but I think overall the last update that we did deploy that was previous to this one, I guess is what it ultimately is we did that completely through Azure Update Manager. And it did just seem to work. I think it took overall about 8 hours to, not 8 hours, I'm sorry, 4 hours to patch that entire cluster, but it's smart. That's the whole point of the cluster we're updating is smart enough to know like, hey, I need to take these down in the proper order. So your entire environment doesn't, take a hit to where you can't use it anymore. So it's smart enough, intelligent enough to know they built that into the technology. It gracefully shuts things down, puts disks in maintenance mode when it needs to, waits for the storage jobs to complete, all the things that you had to just manually check on in the past, so you didn't shoot yourself in the foot. It just does that. So I do like that.
No, I love that. Yeah, no, that's great. And again, I want to reiterate to people that are listening that may not be using 23H2, that is a major just quality of life thing that is now available. You hit the nail on the head. I'm still running 22H2 at scale in my data center. I am still logging into each and every server because I don't 22H2 CAU, I don't trust with certain things. And I am manually and going into sconfig, installing an update, pausing a node, waiting for storage jobs or whatever, and then rebooting, patching, sometimes rebooting twice. And it's a life drain. Like you're
Yes.
exhausted at the end of it. So it's nice that there is more modern and mature tooling that is functional. And that's the point I want to reiterate. This is something that is now tried and tested and functional and the preferred way to do it. So that again, going back to that support statement you made, if you have problems, it's going to be very narrow what those problems are, and support can help you, sniff it out.
Exactly.
All right, great. So listen, Matt, I hope this is the first of many chats we can have because it's a pleasure talking to you about this, especially at the scale that you're doing things. I think this is going to open a lot of people's eyes, get the gears turning, and maybe light a little fire under their butts to maybe, start thinking about how this can be a solution for them, whether they're already a Microsoft user or not, or if they're trying to get off VMware because of the Broadcom stuff. I think this would be, a great conversation to have with you again about some other topics. So I hope to have you back on, and thanks again for taking the time out today.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And just one final thing I would say, there's a lot of education customers that are very hesitant to adopt different technologies. And the good thing about, specifically AVD is you can, I think I said it earlier, but I just want to reiterate one more time. You can deliver a consistent experience no matter where you're at in the world, literally. That's the key is like, don't be afraid to take that step because you can achieve what you want through the use of this technology. So, thank you so much, Ernie. Great talking to you. And we're definitely
absolutely.